Hey guys, so today we're going to talk about Danielle Garrett's newest book called Purr-fect Potions. It's the fourth book in her 9 Lives mystery series, following Celine and Cora and their hunt for Aunt Lavender. So the book starts off, they're at a restaurant eating lunch, and they get an email from Tabitha Blake, who happens to also be an adventurer herself, who offers to come out to Winterspell to help look into Aunt Lavender's missing. Well, I'll take it back. It actually starts with a date. Clinton and Cora are on a date, and it doesn't go so well. She overhears some things between Clinton and his mother, and his mother has absolutely nothing nice to say about her. Calls her hips birthing hips, says that she's below their class. And Cora starts to kind of believe this and is worried that Clint believes this. And so they end up having a disagreement. It's kind of an edgy way of them ending the night. And so then at lunch the next day is when they get the email. And they get excited because this means that someone is interested. Someone's going to help them find Aunt Lavender. And so Tabitha arranges to come to town. And when they get together with her, it turns into, there's just something fishy about her. Like, the first day, she's a hard charger, go-getter, wants to track down everything she can. They go talk to Ernesto, Salvatore's nephew, who inherited his house after he died. And Ernesto lets them into the library so that they can, look at the other books. At this point, they haven't told Tabitha what they have. They haven't told her that they have the first half of the Lotus, the Golden Lotus, and they don't tell her that they have the book. They only mention that the book was missing pages, and it was something that Salvatore had mentioned. And so they go looking to see the library, looking through the library, and Celine happens upon a secret room. So they go into the secret room, and in the secret room, you see several, there's old books in there. It's AC controlled because older books tend to need different temperatures. And so it's a really curious thing, and it's one of the things where it's like, okay, so there's a secret room. Who all knew about the secret room? And that's where the list starts from there. So the housekeeper, obviously, Ernesto, tells them, oh, well, I still keep her on. I feel bad for her. So they go to talk to the housekeeper. Housekeeper tells them, swears up and down that no one else but her knew about the secret room. She didn't tell anybody. Obviously, the only person who would know would be the person who built the secret room, Mr. Midnight. Doesn't that name sound familiar? So Cora and Celine decide they're going to go talk to Mr. Midnight. So they do. They go ask him, and he tells them, oh, you're not the first person to, come see. And they're like, oh, really? There's somebody else who can, and he gives them a name. Someone else who'd asked very similar questions to what they were asking about the room. And he did mention one very vital piece of information. All of the books were spelled to be super heavy if anyone tried to remove them. Which made it seem really interesting that Aunt Lavender was able to remove the book. But yeah, if the book was removed, it would be almost impossible to carry it. It would get so heavy. So, and I think, okay, well, that's another dead end. Like, there's not a whole lot we can do. Then the housekeeper comes back to them and to Tabitha and reveals that she had actually lied to them. There was someone else who knew about the secret room. It was a man, one of the researchers that was allowed into his library, into Salvatore's library, and he actually had been seeing her for some time. But she had just dumped him because she found out that he had hooked up with someone else during his brother's bachelor party. And she was crushed and heartbroken. And she's an older lady, and he was a younger man. And so she was just really angry, and she gave them his name. So they went to talk to him. And of course, he seemed kind of starstruck to see Tabitha because she's famous. She's got a podcast. And they asked him a couple of questions, and he seemed really antsy to get them out of his apartment, like to get him away. And so, of course, Celine was like, well, he was hiding something. And Cora was like, yeah, I agree. He was hiding something. I'm not sure what's going on. Tabitha bid them a good night, seemed kind of, oh, I have to go take care of some things. And she left. Well, Celine and Cora go back to his place, decide to break in. Well, take that back. First, they follow him, and like they sit in the car for a couple minutes, and he leaves after he kicks them out. So they follow him, and he ends up at this busty blonde's house, all making out in the front yard, going into, and they're like, oh, okay, so he's hooking up. That must be the younger woman. Think nothing of it, not a big deal, but Cora and Celine decide they're going to go back to his house because Tabitha had mentioned that there's a rumor about the Golden Lotus, that the actual ink for the pages in Oben's Odyssey were made with gold from the Golden Lotus, and that if part of the lotus was near, it's supposed to react to it. So they're like, okay, well, we have half. We're going to check it out. So they break into his place, start looking around. Nothing's happening. The lotus is not responding to anything. There's nothing. It's not doing anything. And he comes back much sooner than they had anticipated. So Cora gets Celine out the window. Celine goes around to the other side of the house, of the apartment, and distracts him while Cora, tries to sneak out. And she makes it out only to run into him like 2 floors down. And he's like recognizes her, and she's apologizes, says she dropped her keys, and runs away. And so and at that point, like, they're kind of like, okay, so something, it wasn't at his place, so he obviously didn't have it. And they weren't even sure how the lotus was supposed to react. And so they decide they're going to take the lotus back to Aunt Lavender's place, which is where they've been hiding it, and stash it there. When they get to Aunt Lavender's place, Celine notices something. There's like a shadow moving or something. She yanks open, she pushes the door open with magic and runs out to investigate, and it's Tabitha. And they aren't sure why Tabitha tried to break in. She seems super like edgy and dodging questions and not saying anything, and so they kind of split in an awkward way, going about their own ways, and at this point Cora's pretty disenchanted with Tabitha. Like, she was excited when she first showed up, and now she just seems kind of sketchy. And so they go back to Cora's place, where she decides that's where she's going to stash the lotus in the book. And as they're talking, and then there's a date with Clint, another date, and Clint and her, and this breaks my heart. Clint, and when Clint and her had talked, he revealed that his mother had made a deal with him that had changed her inheritance, her will, after his brother had died. And that within 5 years of her death, if I remember correctly, within 5 years of her death, he had to be married, and he had to have his first child in order to receive her inheritance. And if he didn't within that time frame, the inheritance would go to a charity of her choice. And so Cora was like, well, why didn't you say something to me? Like, I feel like this was super important for us to talk about. And he tries to tell her that he didn't think it was a big deal, that it wasn't, like, at the time he didn't need the money, but he was struggling now because, part of his consulting business is, hobnobbing it with the wealthy and meeting with clients and wining and dining them. And he was struggling to do that in Winterspell because they weren't there. And so they took some time to think about it. They had dinner together again. They talked about it. She told him that the problem for her was she'd already had one bad marriage, and that she would always wonder if he had married her for the money. And he asked her if she would be willing to go to Chicago with him, and she said no, and neither one wanted to do a long distance relationship. And so they kind of parted, even though Clint really didn't want to. Like, he told her he could try and convince his mother to change her will, and he loved her, and she said, I don't want this to go any further, and then us break up later because of this. And she was like, and I just can never truly know that you're marrying me for me. And the thing that kind of got me was that Clint never was like, well, I'll just give up the money entirely. Like, who cares? We're not going to worry about the money. I will do it. The problem is that Clint is used to a certain lifestyle. And to maintain that certain lifestyle, he does either have to go back to Chicago and actively work with his clients, or he needs his mother's inheritance. And so unfortunately for Cora, Clint didn't just outright give up the money. Like, crushing, soul crushing, okay? Soul crushing part of this book, okay? So Tabitha at one point disappears for about a day, and when she later shows back up, she tells them that she had to do podcast stuff and there had to put out a new episode, which really makes Celine mad because Celine watches the episode and it's some crazy crack witch talking about river dragons in Florida, i.e. alligators. And Tabitha kind of like brushes it, oh, it's not a big deal. It's, you know, you have to interview everybody when you're doing a piece. And Celine's just kind of looking at like side-eyeing her. And it's weird because like when the book first started, Celine was all about Tabitha. Like, oh, Tabitha Blake, I love her podcast. She's so awesome. And Tabitha wanted to have Celine on her podcast because Celine's a talking cat. And so this turn of events just had me laughing because now Cora's not sure about Tabitha. Celine doesn't like Tabitha. Something fishy is going on here. And so it ends up that Tabitha says she got in touch with a friend of hers and he can get tracking pixies. And he can get his hands on a tracking pixie and they can use the tracking pixie to actually track Aunt Lavender. And so Cora gets really excited because this is actually something is going to happen. Something's going to work. So they get to, and if I remember correctly, before that happens, the name of the girl who had gone to Mr. Midnight and like asked him about the rooms the same way that Cora and Celine had, it turned out that he said, oh, you'd have to ask my daughter Jane about her because they were in the same year of school together. And so Cora thought about going and talking to Jane, and then she realized, she was like, well, I have all my old school yearbooks. So with nothing better to do, Tabitha being MIA, they went ahead and went through the notebooks, or the yearbooks. Found, you know, the year that her and Jane were in school together, and then started looking through the names. And when they came upon the picture of the girl, it was a much younger, not quite as pretty picture of the blonde bombshell that the housekeeper's ex-boyfriend's been hooking up with. And so now she starts thinking, well, if the pages aren't at his place, maybe they're at her place. So they take the part of the Lotus, they go to her place. They were going to try and sneak in. It didn't look like there was no car in the driveway. The lights were off. They figured there was nobody there. They were wrong. Both of them were there, the boyfriend and the bombshell. And so, of course, they get caught. And he's like, I recognize you. What are you doing here? Yeah. And so of course, Celine goes running inside the house. And Cora's like, I'm so sorry. And like chases after her. And the girl's yelling. And so Cora follows Celine in, and there's a box that's on this mantle, and Celine knocks it over, and these pages fall out. And the Lotus gets really warm in Cora's hand, and she was like, oh, these must be the pages. And of course, the boyfriend is horrified. Okay, this is a researcher, all right? Old books are kind of like his thing, and they're like his holy grail. And his girlfriend then tearfully admits that she knew that he had wanted this book. And she knew that the book was important to his research and that Salvatore wouldn't let him have the book and was trying to charge him for the book and trying to get him to pay for the book. And because he couldn't afford it, she felt bad. And so to, like, I guess, prove her love to him, she had gone in, used her womanly wiles on Salvatore to get in, and then had hidden after he had, asked her to leave, and had watched him open it, and then had gone in. She knew she couldn't take the whole book, but she figured she could take a couple of pages, and ripped out the pages that were that he needed. And he freaked. How could you hurt the book? How could you do that? Every book lover's horror, just completely freaking out. And she got so upset, she tried to set the pages on fire, which of course made him more angry. Cora freaked out. They were able to save the pages, but oh my gosh, for a heart-stopping moment, I'm sitting here thinking, oh my gosh, these pages are going to burn up. What are we going to do? Manages to save the pages. Whew, good, not a problem, right? So, and of course he apologizes. Cora and Celine take the pages. He basically tells the girl to hit the bricks because this was not going to work out. And at this point, then we hear back from Tabitha, who is saying, she got the tracking pixie. So they meet up with Tabitha, and she asks them if they have anything of Lavender's, and so they pull out a hairbrush and they have the pixie, do her thing, and then they start following her around town. And at first she goes to Aunt Lavender's place, and then she goes to a couple of Aunt Lavender's haunts that she really liked to go to, and then she heads out further out into like the forest. And Celine and Cora are really confused because Aunt Lavender was not like a campy forest person when she was home. She was fine camping and foresting and stuff when she was an adventurer and you know, on a quest, but when she was at home, that wasn't really her style. And so they get deep into the woods and they come to this like huge cliff, and the pixie goes all the way up into this cave at the top of this cliff. And so then they're like, okay, well, we're gonna go up there. We're gonna find it. And they climb, and Cora's like, I gotta find her. If Aunt Lavender was up there, I gotta see for myself. And maybe they were holding her there. And so she starts to climb up the cliff, and Tabitha keeps telling her to come back. Don't go up there. No, Cora, you don't know what you're doing. And Celine's calling her to come back down. And finally Tabitha says, Cora, she's not up there, and she never was. And that makes Cora come back down. And she turns around and she goes, what are you talking about? And that's when Tabitha reveals that this whole thing was a ruse. Tabitha was sent by someone to distract Cora and Celine and to throw them off Aunt Lavender's trail. And that, in fact, what was up in the cave was a sweater she'd stolen from Aunt Lavender's house the night before when they caught her, and that's what the tracking pixie was sensing. And that Aunt Lavender had not been and never was up in that cave. And they start to question her when Tabitha cries out and turns to freaking stone. I mean, straight up Medusa stone stuff, okay? Like, this woman is probably dead, cannot talk, cannot move, she is stone. And now they're looking at each other like, what the heck is going on? Might I mention, her mom also called her at one point because her mom has the power of divination, and there's a special link between her and Lavender. And so she had once again tried to see if she could see where Lavender was, and overheard a conversation that really scared her. And there were multiple voices, and there was a lot of anger, and Lavender was really weak, and it really scared her mom. And so it was one of those things where she was like, okay, well, the next time, you know, make sure you wait for me. Don't do it without me. That way I can be here to support you. So they get back to the house, and all she can think of is the first person she wants to call is Clint. And she can't, because they're not together anymore. And it's kind of soul crushing, the ending of this book, because it's like, okay, so now they have the pages. And so now they'll be able to maybe figure out where the second part of the Lotus is, but that's still not going to tell them where Aunt Lavender is. And so I'm kind of interested to see where we go with the next book, if we're going to get to see the second half of the Lotus. Maybe they'll find that. Hopefully we'll get another clue as to Aunt Lavender's place. They are supposed to be able to get a meeting with Warden Quentin, which, oh, please, dear Lord, would be super amazing, because the Warden will be able to tell them where they, you know, maybe give them more resources to hunt down Aunt Lavender. Who knows what the possibilities are, but I love this series. I love where this is going. I'm so excited to see what happens next, and I'm praying that her and Clint are able to work it out, because, oh, they're so good together. But so, remember, Purr-fect Potions by Danielle Garrett, if you want to read it. Happy reading!